I used to watch how she took care of him. And I actually said to him, I said, man, you need to put a ring on that finger, because she kept her eye on him and she watched him. And I'm like, man, she loves that guy, you know, but I didn't know what we know now.
In Hollywood, very few names have been able to leave the mark that Chadwick Boseman left in the industry within the few short years of his reign. And just as the years have gone by, Denzel Washington has reignited the topic, giving the world a rare glimpse into the life of one of Hollywood's finest. Join us as we unravel the life of this legend and the inspiring revelations that have stemmed from years of personal contact with Denzel Washington. The making of Chadwick Boseman. Chadwick Boseman's backstory begins off the radar in Anderson, South Carolina, where he was born on November 29, 1976. He was the youngest of 3 brothers in a tight-knit blue-collar family. His mother, Carolyn, was a nurse, and his father, Leroy, was a textile mill worker with a part-time upholstery business. That certainly impacted Chadwick greatly at a young age. He had a poor but rich childhood filled with discipline, quiet force, and guidance that would remain with him throughout his life. Boseman was raised in the South during the 80s and 90s, so he was aware of race and heritage early on. His hometown was racially charged, and he once spoke of how Confederate flags were draped low in every direction. But it wasn't the atmosphere of social injustice that defined him, it was what those around him did about it, being dignified, strong, and united. Chadwick wasn't the loudest among them, but he listened. He observed. He reflected a lot. That reflective side expressed itself in storytelling. How Denzel Washington changed Chadwick's life forever. Something had happened in high school. Chadwick had a friend who got shot and killed. It awakened him. As a way of compensation, he sat down and wrote his first play, Crossroads, and staged it at T.L. Hanna High School. He was not trying to seek glory. He was trying to deal with life, death, and violence in his community. It was not art for the sake of art. It embodied protest, therapy, and reflection all at once. Chadwick continued on to attend Howard University in Washington, D.C., a university more commonly referred to as the Black Harvard. It was at Howard that his horizons began opening up in all directions. Surrounded by black excellence, Chadwick was around mentors and peers who would challenge and inspire him. Perhaps the most influential force throughout these years was Dr. Phylicia Rashad, best known as Claire Huxtable on The Cosby Show, but much more influential off-screen as a mentor and instructor at Howard. She sensed something in Chadwick when a group of her students became accepted into one of the top summer acting programs at the University of Oxford in England, but were unable to afford it. She reached out to someone she knew who might be able to help. And that person was Denzel Washington. This is where Chadwick's story starts to change. Washington, realizing the significance of luck, personally helped Chadwick and a few other students get into the Oxford program. Chadwick did not know, at the time, who his sponsor was. He never found that out until years later, when he himself had begun to become popular in the Hollywood spotlight. At the American Film Institute's Denzel Lifetime Achievement Celebration of the acting icon in 2018, Chadwick was finally able to publicly thank him for the first time, saying, "There is no Black Panther without Denzel Washington." That act of generosity was not just about the fees. It was a passing of the baton, one generation passing the torch to the next. And Boseman embraced that baton.
There is no Black Panther without Denzel Washington.
Fired for speaking truth, the refusal to compromise. Chadwick attended Howard to study directing. He wanted to work backstage, developing scripts and shaping performances, but not acting himself. He graduated in 2000 with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Directing. The acting followed from that, as though he needed to. Chadwick began acting in the hopes of learning how to better work with actors as a director. But when he got started, the screen and the stage began to feel like home. He later moved to Brooklyn and began the hustle. He acted in acting classes at the Schomburg Center in Harlem, did odd jobs, wrote plays, and went to school at the Digital Film Academy in New York. These weren't glamorous starts, but they were formative. His work wasn't all divine gift of talent. It was built brick by brick through education, setbacks, and resilience. Before long, he started landing roles on television in shows like Third Watch, Law & Order, CSI, NY, and ER. However, none of those positions came anywhere near the level of success he would later achieve. He was cast on All My Children during this period, but after complaining to producers about racial stereotyping in the script, he got fired. Ironically, his character was recast and eventually transferred over to Michael B. Jordan. That experience could have scarred him. Instead, it reinforced his code. If he was going to depict a black man on the screen, it was going to be one that was dignified, meaningful, and authentic. That train of thought became a signature of his career, and it all stemmed directly from his childhood, his education, and his heroes. Chadwick once remarked that he felt he had a responsibility to be part of something bigger. And that's a thread that stretches from his very first job to his final performance. His first major hit was in 2013 as Jackie Robinson in 42, which he nearly didn't undertake. He didn't want to get pigeonholed into only doing biopics, but he felt that bringing this type of story to life was worth it. Then came the role as James Brown in Get On Up and Thurgood Marshall in Marshall. These were stories about actual individuals, legends who left a legacy. And Chadwick treated them with the seriousness of an academic and the passion of an artist. And along the way, there was the shadow of such influences as Denzel Washington. Washington's ability to maintain a role with an understated focus, his perfectionism, and his refusal to be typecast were lessons learned by Boseman. On screen and in interviews, you could hear how much he looked up to actors who'd preceded him and how dedicated he was to carrying on their work. By the time Black Panther hit theaters in 2018, Chadwick Boseman was more than an actor. He was acting a superhero, but he was already sort of a vessel, pouring in a generation of struggle, of striving, and of Black excellence. And it wasn't by accident. It took years. The South Carolina youth who penned a play in honor of the death of a friend grew up to be the man who played kings and heroes, always dignified and composed. Before the spotlight, the unseen battles. Chadwick Boseman didn't make a grand entrance. He entered quietly, with purpose. He graduated with a BFA in directing from Howard University in 2000 and moved to Brooklyn to try to make a dream that at that time felt less like a vocation and more like a grind happen. Acting wasn't even his first love, but New York has a way of molding artists through its unease, and Boseman was no exception. He taught acting at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem, worked retail jobs, wrote plays, and scraped together rent while studying screenwriting and digital filmmaking at the Digital Film Academy. There was no fast track. He was talented, certainly, but his early professional life was defined less by his earnings than his ideals. In a business where young Black actors were typically handed scripts overflowing with stereotypes and cliches, Chadwick pushed back. One of his early television parts was on the soap All My Children. He'd been brought on to portray Reggie Montgomery, a black teen with a rough history from the streets. It was a good opportunity, yet Boseman was not pleased with where the character was going. He went to the producers, gave them some input, and spoke to them about the stereotyping. Days later, he was let go. Who replaced him? A young actor named Michael B. Jordan. Most people would have played along to keep the job. Boseman quit. He remarked that people have to choose their battles in a later interview. He had come to realize there are challenges that if you don't battle them, you lose a part of yourself. That kind of quiet conviction remained with him throughout the early 2000s. He picked up small roles on Third Watch, Law and Order, CSI, NY, and ER, usually one-day jobs, not quite paying the bills. He supplemented with theater work in off-Broadway productions and regional theater, and continued to write and direct his own projects. One of his earliest plays, Deep Azure, a drama relating police brutality and inner-city trauma, was nominated for a Jeff Award in Chicago. Raw, poetic, and deeply personal, it was the start of a slow burn that didn't fully ignite until sometime around 2008, when he landed a recurring role as Nathaniel Ray on the ABC family series Lincoln Heights. The show, which was set in a rough neighborhood and followed a black family, gave him additional screen time and an opportunity to show his talent. The next year, he was seen in the short-lived NBC conspiracy drama, Persons Unknown. It didn't stick, but it got him that much closer to more high-profile casting rooms. Then, in 2013, something clicked. Boseman portrayed Jackie Robinson in 42. He hadn't done a large studio movie before, and he wasn't well known. As a matter of fact, he almost didn't audition at all. But the power of the story and what Robinson represented convinced him. Director Brian Helgeland said he cast Chadwick because he noticed that seriousness in his eyes, that sense of history, of respecting the gravitas of a role even when the cameras weren't rolling. 42 changed everything. It didn't just put him on the map, it established a pattern. Boseman wasn't going to play just anyone. He was going to play people who meant something. That same year, he was cast in Draft Day with Kevin Costner, followed by his blistering performance as James Brown in Get On Up in 2014, directed by Tate Taylor. Playing Brown wasn't easy. With the voice, the dance moves, and the inner demons, it was a full-body role. Chadwick dove in headfirst. The performance was risky, audacious, and unapologetically bizarre. Critics praised him for doing the impossible by capturing the godfather of soul without turning him into a caricature. Next came Gods of Egypt in 2016, where Boseman played Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, as one of the only non-white actors in a film widely criticized for whitewashing Egyptian mythology. Boseman accepted the role, but also made sure to speak publicly about the imbalance and the controversies that followed. He followed that up with another biopic, this time playing Thurgood Marshall in 2017, which focused on one of the future Supreme Court justice's lesser-known cases. Again, Boseman chose nuance over grandiosity. He didn't just portray a legend, he owned the role. The Rise of a Hero, how Chadwick made Black Panther a movement. With recorded successes, Chadwick was gaining momentum. Studios were watching, and so was Marvel. The opportunity came quietly, as most big breaks do. In 2014, Marvel announced that Black Panther would make his first appearance in Captain America: Civil War, back in 2016. Behind the scenes, casting directors had already pegged Boseman as their top choice. Marvel Studios chief Kevin Feige later said Chadwick was always the first pick. Chadwick was in Zurich promoting Get On Up when he got the call. He went to the meeting, took the role, but made one thing clear. T'Challa wasn't going to be just another comic book hero. He wanted to bring a sense of heritage, power, and authenticity to the character. He lobbied for T'Challa to retain an African accent. Marvel hesitated at first, but Chadwick insisted. He said, colonialism in Africa would have it that in order to be a ruler, his education comes from Europe. If it's supposed to not have been conquered, then there's no way he would speak with a European accent. If I did that, I would be conveying a white supremacist idea of what being educated is and what being royal or presidential is. By the time the film finally hit theaters in February of 2018, it was more than a box office success. It was a movement. It gave a generation of black children a superhero that looked like them. It showed Hollywood that an all-black cast and a black director could capture the attention of the world. And at the center of it all was Boseman, regal, charismatic, and effortlessly majestic. Black Panther was not the pinnacle of his work. It was the crowning. Then came Avengers, Infinity War, Endgame, 21 Bridges, Da 5 Bloods, and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, his final role before his death in 2020. None of which would have been possible if not for those initial couple of years dotted with teaching, the rejection, the quiet resistance in casting rooms, and the choices he made when no one was watching. Chadwick Boseman did not rise by accident. He rose studiously and brought a generation with him. The secret battle behind the mask. Chadwick's silent fight with cancer. In 2016, as Chadwick Boseman was emerging to global stardom, something happened that few people in his life would ever know. He was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer, a cancer that would quietly ride him through the height of his career. From his breakout playing T'Challa in Black Panther to his final performance in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. For 4 years, he carried the weight of that diagnosis in silence, even as he lifted up millions with his work. He did not stop performing. He did not slow down. He did not even mention it. During this time, Chadwick went through several surgeries and rounds of chemotherapy, even filming scenes on Marvel movies, despite battling suffocating exhaustion and agony. There were days on the set, his agent of many years, Michael Green, stated, when he would stand in between takes in obvious distress, only to stand up straight and hit his mark as if nothing was wrong when the cameras began rolling. Co-stars were later surprised to discover what actually transpired. He had quietly carried his condition and never relented in his pursuits. To the rest of the world, Chadwick was a picture of health and agility, a superhero in the literal sense. Yet, behind the stage, he was engaged in a struggle that only a few knew. He refused to reveal his disease, not because he was ashamed, but because he did not wish it to be his legacy. He wished to have his works do the talking, and it did. Even as his body began to change with obvious weight loss, physical frailty, and fatigue, he persisted. He directed Marshall, 21 Bridges, Da 5 Bloods, and Black Panther after his diagnosis. On Da 5 Bloods, director Spike Lee subsequently admitted at the time he had no idea what Chadwick was going through, but did notice he had his personal team of caregivers attending to him and would retire to a spot away from everyone between shots. But there were clues. In 2020, there were some thin moments caught in a few clips on the internet. There were rumors, some vicious and some worried. He did not respond. In hindsight, the silence was not apathy. It was bravery. He was in the later stages of his illness and continuing to choose grace over pity. Chadwick's continued mission to spread love. And even while Chadwick fought quietly with cancer himself, Chadwick showed up for others fighting the same sickness, specifically children. He was close friends with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital and visited young cancer patients regularly, talked to them, had their photos taken, laughed, and encouraged them. They had no idea he was fighting the same. In one particularly moving interview, Chadwick welled up with tears recalling two dying young boys who had told him that they were living only to watch Black Panther in the cinema. Many would later realize that that was not a scripted moment. That was the real man, heart open wide despite his pain. His trips to the hospital were not photo opportunities. They were quiet, off-screen, and frequent. He would talk to parents, offer gifts, kneel by hospital bedsides, and listen. And never did he tell them that he himself was sick too. He did not want to burden them with his ordeal. He wanted to make them happy, if only for a little while. The day the world stood still, Chadwick's farewell, and Denzel's tribute. When his death was announced on August 28, 2020, the world came to a stop. Not only the shock of losing such a young person, but also the weight of knowing what he had endured and what he had sacrificed over the years. Social media exploded with condolence messages from fans, friends, actors, athletes, and children who had dressed up as Black Panther and who had seen themselves reflected for the very first time on a film screen. Among the messages was Denzel Washington, who years ago had anonymously financed Chadwick's acting scholarship to Oxford while he was studying. Denzel's message was heavy with pride and grief. Denzel described Chadwick Boseman as a good soul and a master artist, who will stay among us forever in his historic performances. Many have remarked that Chadwick brought to mind a young Sidney Poitier, as someone who was extremely intentional about his selection of roles and always had a quiet nobility to him. Overall, Denzel was quite shaken by the unfortunate news and was determined to give the world a closer view at Boseman's personality. A legacy that refuses to die. In just 43 years, Boseman had an impact most people wouldn't have made in 100 years. He embodied strength, dignity, and purpose, both on and off the screen. He was posthumously awarded a Golden Globe and an Oscar nomination for his final effort as Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, filmed while he was dying of cancer. It's a rough, anguished performance of a man clutching at life without realizing he doesn't have much time left. And watching it now, knowing what he was going through, makes the role a lot heavier. But Chadwick's legacy isn't just on the screen. It's also in the way he made others feel. It's in the way Black Panther changed pop culture forever. Not just as a Marvel movie, but as an experience. The film grossed over $1.3 billion and made history as the first superhero film to be nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. It gave a generation of Black kids the power to see themselves as powerful, royal, and worthy. Even in death, the impact continues. Howard University's College of Fine Arts was renamed in his memory in 2021 and became the Chadwick Boseman College of Fine Arts. It was a sort of homecoming for the student who once wandered those corridors with dreams of making a change. Chadwick Boseman's story is a tale of a man who never desired to be in the limelight, but wished to do something worthwhile. He chose to go through his career with integrity and wished to stand for something more than himself. And today, these are all the traits people remember him by. Make sure to check out our other videos, and we will see you in the next one.